Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. It's fabulous that no matter where we are geographically, that we can come together as if we're by a cosy, lovely fire, listening to a story. And nothing in this world beats a good story, I'm sure you agree. So don't forget to go and get that cosy drink, whatever it is, because I've got a lovely story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, it was in the 1980s. I was a young 25-year-old girl at the time, employed by a prominent newspaper. I worked on the advice columnist platform with an older woman in her 60s, who was a proficient, highly regarded therapist, offering her golden nuggets of wisdom to stressed-out people all over America, all hankering to get some much-needed advice, some of them really quite desperate. I believe in the United Kingdom she would have been known as an agony aunt, a preferable name in my opinion, much more endearing and personalised, but somehow the name didn't catch on here in the States. Such a wizened, sagacious, astute and shrewd woman would usually be like a lovable granny, made her appearance known on radio, television shows, and of course in magazines and newspapers. I think it is safe to assume that since the advent of social media offering other easily accessible open and alternative platforms for informative advice and counselling, in more recent years the need for columnists offering their advice is still there, but not nearly as significant as it was back in its illustrious heyday in the 1980s. It certainly was a big deal back then, as people growing up in that generation will surely happily testify. I also know that tabloid readers loved nothing better than learning about other people's controversial, contentious struggles. It always made them feel better about their own. Even my mother wrote into a columnist once, asking for advice over our belligerent, overbearing, fractious next-door neighbour, Mr. Ronnie Badderman, an obnoxious man who was constantly throwing bounteous amounts of dog turd over our fence, through our letterbox, and God knows where else, in retaliation for a tree in our yard that he claimed was blocking out his invaluable light. It would seem that this man was deliberately going around our entire neighbourhood, selecting all the dog turd he could possibly avail himself to find, as a plethora of coiled brown offences was regularly delivered to our home. I mean, who in the world manages to collect a ceaseless supply of dog turd? Well, this man clearly did, and revelled in causing my mother no end of distress. My mother told him he was welcome to cut down the branch from his side of the fence, but would he listen? No, he seemed to believe it was her responsibility. "It's your tree," he had thundered angrily. "You need to remove the branches hanging over my fence. Why should I do it?" My mother had wilfully refused, after which he began his tireless assault on our yard, with, as I said, bounteous amounts of the most grisly-looking dog turd you've ever seen. Of course, he used his own dog's turd as well, as one of his dogs had messy stools, which my mother believed was intentional on his part. It certainly wasn't pretty. Ostensibly, people in those days would send us hundreds and hundreds of pretentious letters to the paper seeking advice. It was a completely overwhelming responsibility, so it was a shared job, done along with another girl called Kerry Gatenby. We helped answer some of these high-priority letters, of which only a select few would ever be published in the paper. We were expected to courteously reply to every single letter, offering some judicious, sapient pearls of wisdom. Many of the letters were about difficulties wrought with awkward neighbours, treacherous, feisty, obnoxious mother-in-laws, partners having affairs, family members at loggerheads with each other, children driving their parents over the edge. You know, that sort of thing. The issues that can sometimes plague us, or contentious problems that one day might become a personal struggle that we're forced to address in our own lives. For the purposes of remaining exclusively anonymous, I will call the agony aunt Linda. She was a real gregarious character who was in her 60s. Unfortunately, she did die over 28 years ago. She was a bright, cheerful, prudent woman, like a full-bodied red wine, jovial, fun-loving, flamboyant, richly knowledgeable, like a wizened owl. I remember she would dress in these bright, flamboyant, loud, in-your-face, unsubtle, colourful, flowery print dresses, always adorned with lots and lots of beaded jewellery. She was a portly, apple-shaped lady who carried most of her weight around her middle section. Her bright, cheerful, cornflower blue eyes were fabulously framed by expensive designer zooty spectacles, always in an array of cheerful colours, and often in unusual shapes and styles that were in no way retiring, for believe me, those glasses would get you noticed, as they were ocular pieces of art at their finest, while her white short curly hair was immaculately managed by her stylist. I do remember she always looked absolutely impeccable, without a stray wispy hair even daring to escape from the firm hold of her lacquer hairspray. Wherever we went, people would gravitate towards her, seeking out her shrewd, savvy advice, whether it was in the middle of the supermarket, in a restaurant, a cafe, or even on a street corner. It wasn't unusual to see a woman out of breath running towards her saying, "Are you Linda Freeman? Are you Linda Freeman, the columnist?" Linda would always nod. "That's right, I'm her." "I can't believe it's you! I can't believe it's you!" The woman would giggle, looking all flustered, growing pink in her face like a beguiled, giddy, overawed fan, who put Linda on a pedestal like an illustrious celebrity of note. "Wait until my mother hears I spoke to you in person! Oh, my word! She won't believe it! This is absolutely incredible! I mean, Linda Freeman! Linda Freeman! Who would think that I would even manage to bump into you like this in the middle of the street like this? I just can't believe it! She'll never believe I bumped into you, just quite by chance." "My mother loves you. She contacted you once about how to deal with her friend badgering her relentlessly for loans. Your advice, it saved her life and her friendship." "I'm very pleased to have been of help," Linda would say, always enveloping the stranger in a warm, affectionate hug that always meant that people loved her all the more for her friendly, endearing nature that was much more like a lovable grandmother. I met Linda when I decided I wanted to get involved in media. It was my father who found the advertisement in the paper quite by chance, but maybe some things in life are not as random or erroneous as we might suspect. "Susan, this might be just up your street," he had said to me, circling the ad in a red pencil which read, "Advice columnist for established paper looking for assistant." I remember looking at my dad, appalled. "I want to write articles for newspapers, Dad. I don't want to be working for someone who answers people's problems. That's not my kind of thing at all." "Why ever not? Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, sweetheart. That's a foolish thing to do. This is the quintessential opportunity, don't you see, for you to get onto the work floor with editors and journalists alike. In no time at all they will become friendly with you, well acquainted, on first-name terms. When they need to hire and promote a journalist for upcoming stories, who are they going to recruit? You or some stranger off the street? Even a rocket scientist would admit they're much more likely to hire you. Think about it, sweetheart. You know it makes sense. You have to work your way up from the bottom to the top. That's how it works. It's called climbing the ladder to your success. But you are the one that has to initiate that first step." My mother said, "Susan, your father is absolutely right. It is who you know in life that gives you advantages. Your father knows exactly what he's talking about." And so it was with great reluctance, a degree of trepidation, and a pair of wobbly knees, as unstable as a dodgy camping chair, that I agreed to apply for the interview, only to find I was up against hundreds of other aspiring hopeful applicants, all as eager as I was to get the job. I remember my heart sank as I viewed the competition. In truth, I felt like a scruffy stray, arriving at the National Dog Show, competing against the fastidiously manicured Afghan hounds with the long, perfect manes of seamless hair. How would I even get a look in, I wondered. I did not feel particularly confident as I entered the interview room with Linda Freeman. I remember she looked at me shrewdly through her pink glasses. I recall she asked me why I'd applied for the position. I said, "I want to make something of my life, grow from a little bud into a bright, big, blossoming rose." She looked at me with a raised brow and promptly said, "Oh, I like that analogy. I can work with that. All right, you're hired. See you in the offices Monday morning sharp." I was absolutely gobsmacked. I could hardly believe that out of the 100 applicants she had picked me. I never ever found out why. I wish I had. I'm ever grateful to my father's invaluable advice, as it worked a charm. Sure enough, I ended up with an eminent aspiring career working with that paper for many, many years. Anyway, onwards and upwards with my bizarre story. I remember it was a Tuesday morning. It was in summer. I was wearing a cool cotton pink dress with printed white flowers on it that came above my knees, as Linda Freeman always appreciated colour. She would always complain tirelessly about people wearing drab colours and wrinkle up her nose, saying, "Oh, I do loathe beige. Anything colourless and mundane does make life so awfully dull. It's not a mistake that God made all the flowers colourful. Why? Because it uplifts us. It makes us feel good. That's why." I had arrived at the offices earlier than usual that morning. I sauntered into the kitchen to prepare myself a nice piping hot cup of coffee, while finally, with my coffee in hand, I reluctantly ambled over to the huge, overwhelming piles of letters that awaited me in the postal bag on my desk. I physically let out a huge sigh. At the daunting task that lay ahead of me, as my friend, who normally helped me with my job, was now on leave. So I hastily began opening a few with Linda Friedman's ornate ivory paper cutter. But it was one letter that was so unique, it grabbed my attention. This is exactly what it said. I still have a copy of it today. It read, "Dear Linda, I don't know where to start when writing you this letter of mine. I cannot lie, I am unduly concerned that you might think of me as delusional or as batty as a fruitcake. I want to assure you that this is certainly not the case. I am of sound mind, a woman of mature years in my early 20s. I am the devoted grandmother to two very special adoring grandchildren, one that is 6 years old, the other that is 12. I'm writing to you concerning my 12-year-old grandson Isaac, who is inordinately giving me a great cause for solicitous concern in regards to a delicate, troubling matter that has come to my attention of late. My daughter and her husband were travelling abroad to England for 3 weeks to visit a relative on her husband's side of the family. I was asked to move into the lodge to mind their 3 rambunctious, energetic large dogs, along with their 2 cats and 1 parrot, and of course to take care of the grandchildren. Naturally, I was absolutely thrilled, looking forward to this invaluable opportunity to spend some quality time with my grandkids, of whom I cherish greatly. The sprawling, very impressive ranch is situated in northern California, a fishing and hunting retreat in Plumes County, an idyllic rural spot with exquisite views, beautiful silvery lakes, surrounded by acres of resplendent national forest, consisting primarily of red firs, logpole pines, incense cedars, and Jeffrey firs, along with a scattering of hiking trails. It is the perfect, enviable environment upon which to raise children, close to the natural world, where there are lots of indigenous wild animals, from deer, the occasional bear, raccoons, skunks, bobcats, coyotes, and of course mountain lions. The moment I moved into the lodge, I kept noticing my grandson, 12-year-old Isaac, would disappear into the woods, vanishing from my sight, failing to adhere to my rules that were like water off a duck's back as far as he was concerned, possibly because his mother has never disciplined him before. She's very bad like that. Naturally, I insisted that he stayed in close proximity to the lodge, as I like to keep a beady eye on him at all times, as of course I was responsible for his charge. I took that role very seriously. He assured me that his parents let him do pretty much anything he wanted to do on their extensive property. "But Granny," he would protest, "Mummy lets me play wherever I want." Of course, that doesn't surprise me at all, as his mother is a free-spirit hippie type who's never taken responsibility for anything seriously a day in her life. You must understand that under no circumstances do I wish to deride or denigrate my own daughter, for that would be a terrible thing to do. But I have to say she is easygoing, laid back, very relaxed, much like a golden retriever, but probably not as astute, quick-witted, sharp or perceptive. I would say she is exceptionally naive, impressionable and callow, like a babe in the woods, I'm afraid, as far as her own children are concerned. I confess I'm probably an overprotective, punctilious grandmother, but I knew instinctively that little Isaac was hiding something from me, so I decided to investigate what he was getting up to behind my back. Suffice to say I was more than a little curious, as whatever it was that appeared to be keeping him very entertained was doing so famously for several hours during the day. Now I know from personal experience that little boys can easily become bored, but this was never Isaac's problem at all. On the contrary, he would return home, buzzing happily like a bee over a can of cola, looking like a perfectly contented boy that had been having a very good time, and being on his own, isolated like this, and so content, I did find my antennae were wagging more than just a little, shall we say. I sensed something was up. Nothing was to prepare me for what I was to uncover. One day when he rode his bicycle into the heart of the woods, I was close behind him on my daughter's mountain bike. Luckily he didn't observe me. I can be very discreet when needs must. I watched Isaac as he climbed eagerly off his bike, balancing it somewhat precariously against a tree. He began calling the name Oot, 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 or something like that, of which I cannot pronounce eloquently, I'm afraid. I'd like to mention that this forest is exquisitely beautiful. I could quite understand why he'd want to hang out there all day. Even I was completely beguiled by its magnificence. The trees are very tall, with long slender trunks clustered together quite tightly, but it is strewn with long trails and pretty ground covers. I decided to hide behind one of those trees. I remember thinking, who the heck is he calling? Then gliding through the trees was this 4-foot creature, but it looked human, only there were aspects to it that reminded me of a primate, most notably the bullet-shaped head, the very long arms, and of course the hair-covered body. Otherwise it was like a young boy covered in hair. Naturally I was unduly alarmed that my grandson was playing with this strange human-like creature, but it seemed that they had a very good, solid friendship. But it was when I saw the parents that I became incredibly alarmed. The mother and father of this strange hairy boy came to sit down on the earthen floor together, or should I say they squatted on their haunches to watch their child play with my grandson. The parents of the hair-covered boy were monstrously huge in size, scaring the living daylights out of me. I stood behind the tree, trembling, shaking like a blancmange jelly, with panic filling my chest with a rising level of angst. I can do no justice in my descriptions to describe these anomalous creatures to you. In truth, I never envisaged such outlandish, peculiar creatures could exist here in North America. Surely I would have heard of such things before. How can something this big hide in plain sight in our forests without ever being observed? It boggles the mind. Well, it most certainly does mine. But let me assure you unequivocally that these things are indeed real. The parents were easily over 7 foot tall, without any exaggeration on my part. Easily about 3 foot wide, possibly even more. They were all covered in a similar dark brown colour hair, much like that of a black bear, only the hair was much more human-like in texture, and there were bald patches under the arms and on the knees. I discerned that their heads were bullet-shaped, like their sons', with human-looking dark faces, flat noses, deep-set dark eyes, high cheekbones, sloped foreheads that were heavily furrowed. There are no words that I can use to emphasize the substantial size of their colossal bodies that were burly, muscular and powerful, built like a truck. Their vast size was indeed an issue that troubled me most, as I am desperately concerned that they may not know their own strength or power. I am reminded of picking up a tiny insect in order to rescue and save it, like a ladybug, for example, and unintentionally squeezing it between my fingers because it's so tiny. If this creature gave my grandson a friendly thump on the back, it could potentially knock him unconscious. I know it sounds dramatic, but it is a big worry for me that will not abate. It has caused me a great deal of distress of late. Yet I have to tell you, my grandson was playing close by to them, totally oblivious about how formidable, daunting and imposing these powerful creatures are. In truth, they were benign and benevolent towards him. I'd go so far as to say they were sweet, even-tempered, actually quite endearing in a funny sort of way, but like two proud parents arriving at a football stadium to watch their kids playing a sports game. Their son and my grandson were playing together so happily. It certainly was a pleasure to watch. They were playing with Coca-Cola labelled yo-yos, but the hairy boy made my grandson look like a novice. He played with that yo-yo with a coordination that I've never ever seen before. For a moment I forgot my fear. I marvelled at this creature's dexterity, how he was able to force the gravity to spin the string up and down in his hand without even losing that quintessential flow. He was performing stunts with that yo-yo that I've yet to see, without tripping once or losing the memento with the string, so to speak. Before long the parents were shown the yo-yo by my grandson. They studied it together curiously, with their deep-set dark brown eyes, filling with excitement and expressions of wondrous awe, like two enthusiastic kids. Of course their own kid demonstrated to them how to use the yo-yo, At first the parents got it wrong for the first couple of attempts, but they soon caught on quickly, and in no time at all they were playing the yo-yo even better than their own son. My grandson was saying to them, "You can play the yo-yo better than anyone I know in the whole world." I think they understood what he was saying, as they seemed heartily pleased with the compliment. The creatures were talking together excitedly, like frenzied bees, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. Their language sounded like one of those long-forgotten Indian languages from the Navajo Nation. I could be wrong, but that was my impression. When my grandson came from the woods, I confronted him. I told him I'd seen his friends. I told him I was worried about him playing games with such dangerous-looking creatures, even though they did seem so benign. He laughed at me and said, "Granny, they're not dangerous. They're my best friends. They love me. I don't even know any humans as nice as them. They would never, ever hurt me." I said to him, "But they're very big, Isaac. Imagine if they did hurt you." He said to me, "Granny, just because they're big, it doesn't mean that they would hurt me. A big dog doesn't hurt the little dog in a household, does it? I'm family to them. They will never, ever hurt me. They're protective of me." Of course, that told me off, put me firmly in my place. I know if I refuse to let my grandson play with his hairy friends, then I can almost certainly welcome tantrums, discord and chaos in this home of mine. Well, in this home of their parents, which of course is the last thing I want to do. Also, if I was to contact my hillbilly daughter, who is so vague, so incredibly caught up in a dream world of her own making, that I was worried about Isaac's welfare playing with those creatures, she'd never take me seriously for a month in Sundays. She'd tell me to stop being a stick in the mud and to let Isaac play with his hairy friends. She will definitely see things very differently to me, and that is a grievous worry. The reason I'm writing to you, Linda, is I'm wondering if I need to worry about the welfare of my grandson interacting with these wild-looking people. Is he in danger? Should I be concerned? I would appreciate your sound advice. Yours faithfully, Lydia Anderson. As you can imagine, I was completely stunned, perturbed and bewildered by this incredulous, extraordinary letter, pondering what kind of creature it was that this little boy called Isaac in Northern California was interacting with in the woods. I handed over the letter to Linda, who claimed she knew of an indigenous Indian who might have the answers to Lydia's concerned questions. This was her letter that she wrote back to the fretful, very bothered grandmother. "Dear Lydia, thank you for taking the time and energy to write me a letter that left me with more questions than answers, for I am no expert in the matter of human relationships with unusual, anomalous creatures such as you describe. However, if they are so human in appearance, there is a distinct possibility that they could be a lot like us, sharing many of our human-like characteristics. I took the initiative to contact an old Indian friend of mine on your behalf to see if he could give me some insight to your extraordinary dilemma, as I have indeed heard of such outlandish creatures existing in North America before, bearing a startling resemblance to a human but only covered with hair. I was amazed to learn that my Indian friend has had very positive interactions with the creatures that you describe, that many refer to as the guardians of the forest, a race of giant human-like beings covered in hair, often known by the name of Sasquatch. While it is true that there are stories that describe these mountain giants as dangerous, they are normally benign and non-aggressive by nature, although there are exceptions to that intrinsic rule, as they are as individual as a human being, where some are good, others duplicitous, not too different to us, although most of the good ones prefer not to interact with humans at all. It's the ones that are a little obnoxious by character that might be looking to pick a fight. In my experience of counselling with human beings over the years, I have met people intrinsically evil that you could never ever trust. I have met people who are kind to the very core that you could trust with your entire life. In my personal opinion, although I'm no expert in this matter, from your descriptions of how the creatures interacted with your grandchild, it would seem to me that they are kindly by nature. The Bible passage comes into mind. By their fruit you will know them. If the creatures were a potential threat or liability to your grandson, he would have been in trouble long time ago. With these creatures, their behaviour would have revealed their hearts. A violent, aggressive creature would possibly have an evil heart. A kindly creature, a very good one. It seems to me, Lydia, that your impressions of your grandchild Isaac playing with a yo-yo with these creatures, that even you experienced a great measure of joy watching them interact together, which in itself is revelatory. It tells me a lot, for you would never ever derive pleasure from something you perceive to be an underlying threat, or of course an invisible landmine that's waiting to go off. I believe your higher self or intuition sensed that the creatures were actually harmless. Their human-like similarities lead me to believe that they can relate to us in many remarkable regards, and have more in common with us than we may actually realise. As for your desperate concerns about the creature accidentally harming your grandson with a thump on the back, I think those are unfounded. As humans, we are very careful when picking up a delicate animal like a kitten or a small puppy. We're mindfully aware of their fragility. These creatures, I'm in no doubt, understand that by contrast to them, we're exceedingly fragile. They're intelligent, I'm sure they perceive this fact, and are naturally gentle towards your grandson Isaac, based on the fact that they care for his well-being. It is my Indian friend's emphatic belief, based from his years of experience with these Sasquatch creatures, that you have nothing to concern yourself with, given that they have befriended your grandson personally. If they have welcomed him into their lives, he is possibly the safest person in your entire household, as they would defend your grandson to the death, if needs must. Such is the extent of their loyalty to those they invite into their immediate circle. He assured me that he has personally befriended a Sasquatch himself in what remains to be a solid, enduring friendship to this very day. He believes that they have accepted Isaac as one of their own. However, if I were in your shoes, I would speak to the parents about his unlikely friendship with these creatures, even if your daughter is as vague as you say, when they return from their holiday abroad. It is important that they're not uninformed about what their son is doing when he plays in the forest. They must be aware of your son's attachment to his hairy friends, for their son is impressionable. Any foolish move on their part, the son will be unlikely to ever forget, which of course could potentially harm that very essential parental bond. So tread cautiously with wisdom, as children have very long memories. My Indian friend is prepared to visit your home to give you any further advice. I hope that my letter has been of much help and comfort for you in your current dilemma. Yours faithfully, Linda Freeman. I do know that the Indian friend of Linda's did visit the family and was able to assure them that the Sasquatch in the wood were in fact benign, benevolent and harmless. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.